Millions of buyers are sitting on the real estate fence because they're waiting for the market to turn their way. But at the end of the day, you're ready to buy a house when you're ready to buy a house. When your walls are closing in on your growing family, or when the house is too big because your kids have moved out. When you're sick of paying someone else's mortgage, or when it's time to retire somewhere new. Buyers can't wait for a market shift. They need a clear path forward and wisdom from real people. That's where How to Buy comes in. You'll join me, Leo Ansoliaga, as we hear how to buy stories and advice from real buyers and the professionals who help them along the way in mortgage, real estate, insurance, financial planning, contracting, appraisal, and so much more. Now, let's jump in to today's episode. In this episode of How to Buy, I am joined by Alex Vela, a certified financial planner. Alex and I talk about how financial advisors can guide clients, especially those in their 30s and 40s, through smart real estate and investment decisions. We unpack different types of investors and why having a clear process makes all the difference. I especially loved Alex's perspective on how planning isn't about predicting the future, but instead about preparing for it. We hope you enjoy. What a treat it is to have Alex Vela from FBB, a financial advisor, a student of finance, and I would argue now a friend. Alex, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Leo, for the kind
Well,
happy to be here.
thank you. When we're not, talking about boats, dirt bikes, and all the fun things that we have in common, including some Bolivian food, let's be honest. You and I have had incredible conversations about business, about, the journey that we've been on for a few years now. And most importantly, how we're obviously serving our clients and some of the most intricate parts of their journeys, right? And so I guess, Alex, before we get started here, give us a little background about yourself, your journey, how you got started in your field, and then we can kind of go from there.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So, a little bit of background about me. I didn't necessarily start kind of in the advisory business to begin with. I was more on the market side of things. I started out as an equity trader, and then I kind of progressed and moved on to the client services side of things. And then from there, what I really kind of saw was the value add in kind of working with people,
Mm,
and that really drew to me, right?
mm,
Particularly working with senior management and kind of knowing how they approach problems
mm.
and kind of solving that for a client was actually kind of eye-opening. So looking at that kind of made me want to be a financial advisor and kind of work with people and delegating kind of any tasks or needs that they have.
Yeah, I mean, and what a great, synopsis, of your journey, right? Like nobody, at least the people that we had the pleasure of talking in any different types of industry, wakes up on a Saturday morning and says, you know what, I think I'm going to go be a CFP, right? And dedicate, 10 years plus of my life, to this journey. But, as you obviously explore that particular field, like, I mean, you said it best, right? Like you kind of start to have an affinity, not just to, crunch numbers, not just to, look at, different investment vehicles, but most importantly, like you said, guiding clients in one of the most, nebulous and sometimes, let's be honest, like overwhelming, components of their life, right? I mean, people that need guides in this journey, are nervous, to engage people such as yourself and myself. But, talk a little bit about the importance of that, right? Talk a little bit about why it is so important, and at least in your career, that you found that people need to have a plan in place, a process in place for their life, their journey, their goals, and everything they're trying to accomplish financially.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, to begin, I think most people starting out, right, like you're in out of college, kind of starting your job, you're in your industry or a few jobs changes before that. But kind of approaching kind of that 30-year mark, people kind of don't really think about planning for retirement or looking to buy their first house automatically, right? It's more of like, hey, what's my friend doing, right? And a lot of that comes from kind of their kind of social atmosphere that they're in,
Mm,
right? So you can kind of chug along and kind of not really think about any of the long-term planning needs that kind of people actually should be thinking about. Um, but overall, I mean, it's more of like r- finding someone you can trust and you can
mhm,
reach out to,
mm.
right? To kind of help you through kind of those life moments, whether it's building a business, whether it's planning for retirement, saving for college, buying a house, right? Um, so those are just some of the few things people think about but aren't necessarily actively engaging or planning for.
Yeah, and I think, to your point earlier, right? I think at the very beginning of this journey, when you're starting to at least dabble in the future planning of your life, you kind of look to your peers and kind of model out to see what some of the early adopters are doing, right? Like, if my friend Bill or Mary is doing something, and I know that they have obviously they've been very meticulous in the past, that's usually a clue for me to kind of maybe start thinking about a investing in real estate, buying our our first place. B, maybe start thinking about retirement, right? But many people don't necessarily have the proper guidance in terms of that process, right? So I guess as we go into that journey, like what are some pieces of advice that you found helpful for clients that are in that mid 30s to early 40s journey that okay, are starting to think but don't necessarily know where to start? Where do they start looking for a not just an advisor but maybe someone that's going to help them plan? Where do they start looking for the resources and the advice that is going to guide them in their first purchase? Can you give us a little bit of insight there, maybe advice for some of the people that are in that age group that are thinking about that particular part of their journey?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's new for them, right? Particularly when they're kind of intimidated about the whole
Mhm,
situation. This is like a first time thing, right? They're nervous, we're nervous, right? Like we want to make a good impression. Think of it kind of like as dating, right?
mhm,
Um, but ultimately, it begins with a question, right? It begins, hey, I really need to figure this out,
mm,
or there'll be some sort of consequence, right?
mm,
And that need, right? That kind of call to action, that's when we kind of approach clients or approach prospects and say, hey, let's just have a conversation, right?
mm,
Right. And let's just talk about what are your current needs? Where do you want to go? Ultimately, it's kind of building that framework as to what they want in life, right? Building up those life moments, whether it's purchasing a house, upcoming, right? Planning for 529s in for their kids, and ultimately, like, are we saving enough for retirement, right? So
mm.
those are some of the questions that we help answer, um, just to name a few. But overall, I would say that's where we like to start.
That's a beautiful way to frame it because, one of the things that I teach on a regular basis to our clients is this formula. And the formula simply says this, right? And I think it could be applied to what you just said, right? The current dissatisfaction times the future promise or what you're looking to accomplish needs to be greater than the fear and cost of that particular journey, right? And so I think oftentimes, there are people in their 30s to mid 40s that are thinking that are frustrated about, looking at retirement, are frustrated about seeing these kids grow and start thinking about school and how expensive school is becoming, are frustrated about, the amount of rent that they've been paying on their first, on their first apartment or second apartment or condominium, right? And but not ultimately having a plan, not having a guide that can obviously take them up the mountain one step at a time. And the reason why they hesitate with that, Alex, I would argue, is because most people are selling themselves, right? A lot of individuals that are out there are selling, what they individually can bring to the table, but very few people are actually selling or talking about a process. You and I have an incredible mentor, in the name of Michael Kitces, who talks about this on a regular basis, right? It's the process, it's the step by step guidance, that people are actually looking for, but oftentimes can't necessarily articulate. So, can you talk a little bit about that process and the importance of it? But most importantly, the process that you have built with your firm, and how you obviously address that journey one piece at a time.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a good point. I guess to begin, right, we ultimately, once we've kind of get to know a client, right, get to know kind of what their needs are, what their personal life is like, what they want to accomplish, we ultimately kind of build a financial plan around that, right? But it really is kind of on us to make sure that they're executing on it, right?
Mm,
So they're the pilot, we're the co-pilot, right? And we're
mm,
saying, okay, well, maybe we should turn 5 degrees here or 10 degrees here and do this, right? But ultimately they're in the driver's seat and they're the ones kind of making I would say the final decisions, but
mm,
we're just giving them the options and the guardrails to kind of keep them in line to meet their long-term goals. So um, kind of quoting our friend Michael Kitces, right? You have people that are kind of the self-directed, right, where they have the time, the resources
mhm,
to kind of be their pilot and co-pilot, where they're focusing on, hey, I know what I want to do, I know how to execute. Um, then there's kind of the validators, right? The validators are more like, hey, let me watch a few YouTube videos, make sure I'm on the right path, and then uh, I seem to be okay. And then there's the delegators, right? Where they
mm,
don't have the time or the resources or just don't want to deal with kind of any financial planning aspect of their life and they just want to outsource it, right?
mm,
That's where kind of we come in, right? And that's where we provide kind of the knowledge, the expertise in saying, hey, these are sort of the decisions you want to be making, and we can kind of set that on autopilot for you, and we'll kind of continue to build kind of our relationship, our assets kind of with you over time, right?
mm.
So that's ultimately kind of the value add, right, proposition. So from there, right, and then kind of looking longer term, it doesn't just become a checklist. It
Mm.
actually becomes a more personal kind of trust-based approach, right?
That's so good, Alex, because I think what you're saying is like, look, you know, if you are a person in that age group that is looking ultimately for a guide, and let's be honest, not necessarily have a lot of time, to do this. Perhaps you're building a business, perhaps you are, both members of the actual household are working, right? If you're looking for someone that you can delegate and you can actually trust, but ultimately someone that's going to give you a bespoke process specifically to your needs, that is the ideal candidate, obviously, that could potentially benefit from the services that a firm such as yourselves can provide, right? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, proper planning prevents poor performance. At least that's what my mother used to say growing up, right? You have to plan ahead, and at the end of the day, have a plan in place in order to obviously succeed, right? And that also applies to the liability side of the balance sheet, right? I mean, as people are investing in real estate, whether it's their first home, their second home, their vacation home, proper planning is critical. But as a financial advisor, talk a little bit about how you guide clients as it relates to the liability side, meaning the mortgage, right? Because I would say that most mortgage professionals think about a mortgage as just as a payment and a rate. And even though that's extremely important, right? That needs to be in place and it needs to be aligned, right? At the end of the day, that is incomplete at best. The other side of that equation is literally looking at the mortgage as one slice of your overall financial picture. What is this mortgage going to help me? How is this mortgage going to help me accomplish the goals that I've laid out with my advisor and with my, and with my family in the future? So, talk a little bit about that because that's essentially what you're saying. You're essentially saying we need to be able to understand what your goals are, but how this entire thing fits together.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a great point. When we kind of talk about kind of using capital, right? We talk about using capital efficiently, right? So if we kind of look at the financial plan and say, hey, all right, 5 years down the line, I want to buy a house, first time home buyer. Um, like what are the things that I have to plan for, right? And am I buying the right house? Does this make sense for me? Are we kind of using the best use of capital at the time? Are we taking assets out of the market and kind of using kind of those assets as best as possible, right? To buy the house that they want, either one to meet kind of their future needs of either having kids or if they already have kids, right? Making sure that they're in a good school zone, right? Are comfortable living there. And when we look at kind of people that are actually upgrading their house, right? Saying, okay, well, we already bought a house, um, we're looking to upgrade. That's important too because you're looking at, okay, well, if we're upgrading, we're going to need a little bit more space. We can
Mhm,
like job promotions kicked in. We have a little extra income, right? It's important to understand the lifestyle creep that might
mhm,
cause and how might that kind of change the plan for future, right? If hey, we're buying a house in a more expensive area, does that change certain aspects of our income, right, and expenses?
mm.
So those are some of the things to think about as we kind of walk through kind of a plan for implementing that for a client.
Which kind of leads me to the second, group of clients that you guys, obviously have the privilege of serving as well, and that's people that are looking, at retirement, right? People that have said, okay, we worked the plan, we put the plan together. Now we're on the phase of obviously looking at, distributions, looking at, okay, I've put in my time at work. What is the plan now moving forward? So talk a little bit about that because as you said earlier, those things change from time to time, and obviously those tweaks happen because of those life events.
Yeah, sure. So kind of when we look at kind of the bigger picture first, right? What we have is like asset accumulation first, asset preservation, and then distribution, right? So when we're kind of in that preservation to distribution phase, it is, I would say, a major life change because you're earning
Mm,
an income, right? You get a paycheck every month, right, or biweekly, and from then, like everything is kind of on autopilot, right? Like I
mm,
wake up at 7 in the morning, get ready for work,
mm,
and such, right? But then once you're kind of slowing that down and kind of phasing that out of your life, approaching retirement, it's like, hey, I don't really necessarily have to work anymore.
mm,
There's certain mechanics that have to be turned on, right? And that's where kind of we come in and say, okay, well, hey, we have kind of a joint account and an IRA. How do we kind of maximize the tax efficiency between taking distribution from both of those accounts, right?
mm,
So, and it could be skewed one way or the other, right? As to kind of what are the levers, the financial levers we can pull in order to kind of one maximize kind of the tax efficiency of things and kind of also meeting kind of their underlying goals that they want to achieve in retirement, which is either like traveling, buying that nice car, um, or just maybe being charitably inclined. So
mm,
those are, I would say, some aspects to it. There's also kind of the mental aspect to it when kind of entering retirement, where like, hey, what am I going to do, right? So
mhm,
a lot of times people either start a new business, do consulting work, right, just to keep them busy. Um, so that's important, right, as to kind of coaching a client as to, hey, what are your options, right, and having that discussion is kind of how we kind of have that personal touch with clients.
Mm.
Um, so that's definitely an important factor that you brought up.
Yeah, and I think to your analogy earlier, right, of being the co-pilot of this entire, journey, oftentimes, the co-pilot, at least at the beginning stages, needs to also play kind of the role of a coach, right? And so I think when you're in that accumulation phase, right, like you're just going to need someone that's going to be like, hey, we're drifting a little bit. I need for us to get back in line here, right? Let's keep the bigger picture in mind and let's stick to the actual plan. Let's make a couple of tweaks here and there, but hey, let's just stay the course, right? A coach by definition is someone that's obviously holding that person accountable to making sure that, that we obviously stay on course. But like to your point earlier, though, like as you start to progress in that journey, you're ultimately looking for almost like a CFO of sorts, right? Someone that's going to say, okay, we did all the work, we put in all the work. Now let's actually unpack this onion and let's really start to talk about the complexity, one piece at a time, in terms of how we optimize everything that we've obviously done over the last 10 to 15 years, right? And so that role, obviously that person doesn't necessarily change, but the actual role and advice obviously starts to tweak. And so if you are a delegator, right, as you said earlier, that is the level of service that you're looking for, from a financial advisor in your life. Did I catch it correctly, Alex?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's also spot on. One other thing I might add is the journey, right? You
Mm,
mentioned kind of climbing the mountain and being at the top, right? But I think most people kind of find their kind of pride in the journey that they took. So planning for life's moments is equally as important as kind of reaching the top of the mountain, right?
mm,
Whether it's the college planning, the retirement planning, right? The kind of saving for the first time home purchase or upgrading a house, right? Those
mm,
are the moments that are actually you're going to have joy, right, in your life, right?
mm,
And I think for most people, right, I think that that's the important part, right? And helping build that, right, for somebody it is very, I would say, accomplishing, right? Having
mm,
those moments and sharing those moments with clients, right? And I think I'll share my experience with a client we had, right? They were very thankful as to kind of guiding them or walking through them with a first time home purchase, right? We've kind of explained kind of when it well explained the high level and went into details for any questions they might have as to like, hey, who are the parties involved? What are kind of expected fees I should pay, right? Understanding your closing cost, understanding the closing cost worksheet, right?
mm.
Those are aspects that we help with, right? And having kind of personal experience with that and also building a team around that within our
Mm.
firm is is kind of how we also add another additional layer of value to clients.
That's amazing, Alex. And I would say you probably wouldn't say this for yourself, but I would say for you, if you're looking for someone that is going to go on this journey with you, right? If you're in the 35, to 45-year age range and are in the accumulation phase, and you really need a guide and a coach to keep you in line, to obviously walk you through some of the variables that you're going to encounter in the future, whether it's, accumulating money for your kids' college, buying that first home, etc. I can't recommend his firm, Alex's firm, enough in that process. So, Alex, how is it that people can find you? What is the best way to connect with you if people want more information about your firm?
Yeah, sure. Best way, reach out to our website, fbbcapitalpartners.com. You can learn about more about what we do and how we do it. And then obviously that'll lead to a kind of initial consultation. So happy to talk to anybody about that.
Well, it was a pleasure having you, Alex. Thank you again for your time. We'll see you soon.
Great. Thank you.